The Venus Project, TeamSpeak Seminar, July 24, 2011.
How does Jacques witness the other systems theorists like Buckminster Fuller or others, and what does he think about them?
I don't know enough about Bucky Fuller's social plan. I don't remember any. All I remember is that he wanted to cover New York with a big dome, which is not a social institution. It's not dealing with social problems, so I can't evaluate that.
How about other system theorists that you may know?
I have to know about it. I don't know of any other system theorists that include the design for cultures throughout the world.
Has the Venus Project a system of raising children that goes beyond the recommended reading list? Could you provide some details about it? Are children going to be raised by the whole community instead, or just their biological parents?
Well, actually, at school, they will learn how we relate to nature, how to communicate with one another, how to accept differences without being antagonistic. That is all in the school system. I don't know what parents can teach children. If the parents are better informed, they will utilize the same system that we use in our schools.
You know, today they say we have integration, but it's really putting people in proximity of one another, and they really don't deal with the problems that I know of in schools like that today.
You're right, Roxanne, because what we do is we integrate the children so they understand how we relate to the environment. They understand that if we destroy the rivers or dump toxic materials into the ocean, we're going to pay for it in the long run. So they have to be educated in the methodology of maintaining dynamic equilibrium between ourselves and nature.
And they would be learning things that help support the resource-based economy in that direction. They wouldn't be learning parasitic professions like lawyers, advertisers, salespeople, business people.
That's true, Roxanne. Everything that they learned would be related to the living method at the time, how to relate to one another, how to avoid arguments, how to avoid depressed feelings, how to deal with people who have a different value system.
Okay, next question. Don't you see a major challenge in people willingly giving up their personal properties, for example, their home, during any transition?
I don't see people giving up anything. I see that the system breaks down, and that the banks break down, and that the whole economic system goes into a tailspin. In that time, people are not concerned with their factories or their private property.
You saw that during the 1929 Depression, didn't you?
Yes, I did. During the 1929 Depression, I noticed that people lost their factories, but when they were told that the government was taking over their factories because they hadn't paid taxes on the equipment in years, and the reply was, "We have no orders for material. Take over the factory. We don't care." You can't sell a factory that has no output for production. In other words, if people don't have purchasing power, owning a factory is of no value.
How can a system work when some people are not motivated to do their part and others are? Do small groups of people do all the work?
Actually, it doesn't take all the people to be convinced. If you really think about it, I would say that our nation is probably carried on the backs of no more than 200 people. The Teslas, the Pasteurs, Louis Pasteur, Edison. Very few people have made major contributions in altering our lifestyle. It doesn't take everybody to be convinced of the Venus Project. It takes very few people to operate the entire economy.
What if someone takes advantage of the system?
I can't conceive of that. Only during the transition we will have problems. But after the system is established, there's just no place for a takeover. In fact, if you take over, you hurt yourself. What we do is try to benefit all people, all over the world. Those patterns of behavior of takeover are really during the monetary system. They do not occur in a resource-based economy.
Don't people make the decisions for the machines? How can machines make decisions for people?
All we do is program the machines to turn out a certain amount of products, depending on the population in each given area. Machines are in touch with programs that are set in. How many toothbrushes, how much toothpaste, how much hair lotion, whatever it is people need, are pre-programmed and set in on the information area. And the machines are in touch with information. Just like they turn out warplanes today or machine guns based on the amount of soldiers you have in a given area. We use the same methods that industry uses, only more efficient, only on a larger scale. It isn't the machines that make the decisions. The programs are preset for the machines. For example, if you have 7,000 people that need houses, then the machines contact the housing system and indicate how many houses are needed in each given area. That is already known. That's based on the work of the survey committee. When the survey committee tells us we need so much food, so much water, so much clothing, all that is just like the military system or a boat that has 1,000 passengers on the liner. If you have 1,000 passengers, you order so much water, so much food. If you have 2,000 passengers, the people that operate the liner now know just what is needed to handle 2,000 passengers. That's pre-programmed. All that the computers do is carry out the programs which are initiated for them.
In the new society, will there be regulations that restrict freedom of choice?
No, that's built into the system. I don't know what freedom of choice means, but if you want a certain suit of clothing, you go to the access centers and you can access whatever clothing you want. You cannot take advantage of the system because the system knows what you've taken and knows how long it will last and how long it takes to get additional clothing. In other words, it has an inventory method so that you can't cross over or do whatever you want to do. It's based on understanding you, your needs, and what you've been requesting in the past.
But your choices will be much greater. You'd have access to anything that the society can initiate. A high-energy society. So your choices would be much, much greater than today. It doesn't depend on money. We always say you're as free as your purchasing power today. We have to give up our current cities. How can we do that? Won't it be wasteful?
It's very wasteful operating your cities today. In other words, they are so complex with each set of windows different on each house and each architect designing each building, which is a tremendous waste. And the city just spreads out inefficiently. And of course, if you have a conventional city, if you have to make changes in the transportation, you have to really drill new tunnels under the city. A constant revision and adaptation process would be required to maintain the old cities. It's much cheaper to level the old cities, keep some as museum cities, so that the future can look back and see what it was like living in the old cities. But I would say it's cheaper to mine the old cities for glass, steel, metals, whatever materials we can get from the older cities. The new cities are very different design and utilize much less energy to operate.
If people are a product of their culture, the monetary system, then how can we change our thinking?
You don't change your thinking. Your thinking is changed by television programs, by news programs, In other words, all the programs in the future are designed to enable you to function better in the new society.
How can we describe the Venus Project to people in a way that is relevant to their current life?
Well, first of all, they have to face difficulties. They have to agree that politicians cannot handle problems. They have to meet a certain amount of restrictions before they even concern themselves with social change.
What is your position on art and music in the Venus Project when it's initiated?
I have no particular position. Whatever music people enjoy will be forthcoming. And whatever art, there'll be many art exhibits throughout the world. And if the public likes particular kinds of art, they will select it. If they don't, they'll reject it. So the art world depends on their creativity, what they've got to offer, and what society needs at the time.
There'll probably be a broader range of that as well, because people would have access to learn how to draw or how to make pieces of artwork or how to play musical instruments. It'll be accessible to them, plus the training.
Well, the newer type of musical instruments will be far greater, and the range of music and the sound systems will be far better. So your options are enormous in the future in art, music, playwriting, or literature.
I've heard you talk about music in relation to how the body reacts to sound. Could you talk about that?
It will be more of a study of acoustics and sound systems and how the body reacts to it rather than composing music. We want to know just what sound can possibly do to alleviate tension, to make a person feel more relaxed. So it'll be the study of sound and its effects on the human body rather than music as it is today. That has to do with your conditioning and the style of the music in the region that you live. All those things have to be taken into consideration. It isn't music that you study, it's the effects of sound on the human body.
Renderings of the cities, of your latest city, show a train going through the center dome. The question says, I think the train would make much noise going through the city.
Apparently, you're not familiar with noiseless trains. It's possible to put a neoprene or a cylinder or a circle in the wheel itself that dampens sounds. In other words, if you can picture this, the middle of a wheel, if it's not a maglev system makes no sound at all. When you have maglev transportation on a broad scale, you don't have a noise problem in the first place. It isn't getting rid of noise, we just don't have noise by designing systems that are silent. If you put a lead sheet laminate in ceramic materials, the ceramics make no noise. Even when the dishes are moved in a restaurant or when they're moved in the kitchen, you don't even hear it. It's many different ways of designing plates, coffee cups, all kinds of utensils that make no noise.
This person's heard in your earlier DVDs how you explain how children will learn about the environment by going out into the environment on tours and boats and things like that. Their question was, how are abstract things like mathematics, how will they be taught?
It depends on the program, and it depends on how it's used. I can't answer that unless you name a specific direction that math is taking. And if it takes a specific direction that's related, I'm not talking about theories, I'm talking about specific math related to the design of bridges, buildings, transportation, space travel, all math related to some physical entity is the kind of math we deal with. Theoretical physics is something entirely different.
This is an interesting story. There used to be someone that went to Jacques' early lectures before I was around, and that was like 1976, before that. And he was a sign painter, and Jacques got him interested in science. Yeah, Jacques is whispering, he's also a Catholic. but he got him interested in science, and he went to college looking for other teachers who taught like Jacques did, and he couldn't find any, so he emulated the way Jacques taught. He ended up being a physics teacher, and he wrote a book based on the methods and the way Jacques teaches called Conceptual Physics, and it's in most high school and college physics courses today. And it's in its something like 13th edition. And I think the last edition, he has a whole page dedicated to Jacques and how he inspired him and how he taught him how to teach physics through conceptualizing and relating it to things in the real world. With faster transportation systems, what modifications would take place if typical wildlife is crossing paths?
Most transportation systems are elevated above the ground in particular regions so that wildlife can cross under the transportation systems.
And they're also concerned with this in relation to automated machinery and wildlife, or people too, I imagine.
I still don't know what the question is.
What modifications would take place if wildlife was in front of automated machines?
Automated machines are caged off from wildlife so they can't be injured or hurt by the machines. In other words, just as they are protected today, no human can walk over to a machine without entering the plant in the first place. And really, all that sort of thing is easy to handle. I see no difficulty in that area at all. Wildlife would not be injured by machines.
And if a machine was out in the field, an automated machine, the machine is as smart as the number of sensors that you put into it. So it would stop. It wouldn't just ram into anything in its course. It would stop. If you put sensors in it, that makes it do that.
This is true. What is needed is sensors in automobiles and all transportation units so that if any form of life or any type of object is within so many feet of that unit, it scans it and puts on the brakes automatically. You can't back your car over a child because there's sensors on the back of the car which sense the environment several feet in front of the car and put the brakes on automatically and alert the driver if he is driving the car before automatic systems are set in. But even if automatic systems are set in, they have sensors on them, not a single sensor, but several of them on separate circuits. So if one fails, the others take over.
I know they're starting to do this in cars now, but you talked about this 50 years ago. I think even on the Larry King show in '74. My current approaches are not having much success. Could you please explain some of your techniques for getting through to people about the Venus Project?
Well, I can only tell you about the people that I've encountered. First, you have to understand their value system. If they're religious, see, you have to give me an example of the kind of person. Let's say they're very religious. Then I quote the Bible in which it says, "Thou shalt not kill. Love your enemy. If a man strikes you, turn the other cheek." That all people are brothers and sisters. If they pretend to go along with that concept, then you don't have a problem. If they violate the teachings of Christ or what is in the Bible, "Thou shalt not kill," they will not join the army. They will not take part in military systems. Apparently, I've never met a Christian, that is, one that behaved that way.
And other techniques for people who aren't religious, trying to get through to them?
You have to know their values, where they're coming from, and then you have to use a referent, a physical demonstration wherever possible. If you can demonstrate shape memory alloys or materials that they know nothing about, then you can talk to them about application. But if you don't share or demonstrate something, if they have no reference for what you're talking about, they will not understand you. You have to have a physical reference for what you're talking about.
What would the Venus Project do with excess nuclear weapons, assuming there are any left?
We would do a lot of research on how to break them down and how to find other uses for that material. But that would require a great deal of research to find out how to use nuclear materials in whatever state they're in.
I've heard you talk about an interesting application in terms of purifying waste in hospitals.
Well, we can make cylinders under the ground with some of the nuclear waste, and as the contaminated fluids flow through the pipe, they are sterilized. We can use that deep underground so that it does not affect people. And we can use much nuclear waste for treating sewage and other materials that may possibly contaminate the environment. But that requires specialized research, and in the future we will do that kind of research.
If circumstances remain similar during the transition, would sea-based infrastructure be preferred in places of overpopulation like Tokyo?
I would say that most of the sea-based cities are really there to clean the ocean environment and restore it to as near a natural condition as possible. And the cities in the sea would house students that are studying marine sciences, and that is to coordinate them all over the world, and how to remove toxic and waste materials from the ocean. The United States Army, some years ago, about 45 years ago, dumped 67 tons of nerve gas off the coast of Miami. So soldiers who just say, yes, sir, are not really there to defend the country. They don't even know what national defense means. National defense means bridging the difference between nations so you don't have to kill people to bring them around. In other words, armies and navies will be dispensed with. There'll be no such thing as the Pentagon in Washington. There'll be a bureau there that is comprised of problem solvers, how to deal with the many problems we have, not how to fight or kill or destroy cities or design weapons of mass destruction. That system will be phased out entirely. We are not civilized yet.
Once sufficient understanding of genetic engineering was attained, would or could we genetically engineer plants, animals, ourselves, and our children?
That's a very difficult subject because it depends on how far into the future. Only when the effects of genetic engineering are understood, the negative effects and the positive effects, so we can make an intelligent choice. We can't make an intelligent choice just by splicing genes and trying to affect food. We don't know the long-term effects. So in the future, very careful studies will be made before we use genetic splicing.
With virtual and augmented reality becoming more advanced, would these technologies be used to interface with the environment?
They'd have to be used to interface with the environment. We cannot afford to take any chances with new materials and new techniques. They'd have to interface with the environment, and all of the lethal or detrimental effects would have to be phased out before they are utilized.
I think this person was just talking about virtual into the environment. Well, I guess you took care of that. I assume that the oceans can provide for more people than land can, so would it be out of the question for the major population centers to be in the oceans, or am I correct at that assumption?
Well, you're many years into the future, because what we have to do is learn how to cultivate food in the sea. In other words, we will have various designs of platforms that are supported in laminated form under the water, and we would grow and do research on new edibles that can be grown at sea and nurtured at sea. Sea farming will become a major system in the future for taking care of human needs. Of course, we must maintain a population in accordance with the carrying capacity of each environment. And once we do a statistical study of the carrying capacity of the Earth's resources, we must maintain a population that's in accordance, in near perfect accordance with the carrying capacity of the environment, not the opinion of some architect or senator or Congress. All those people make decisions based on practically nothing. They really know nothing, and they have no capability. I know of no politician that ever made a contribution in the growth of food, electric transmission of high-power transmission with less losses. I know of no contribution made by any politician in human well-being.
If certain drugs or substances like LSD were found to have psychological benefits, would their use be permitted?
If they're found to have benefits, yes.
Okay, why do you put so much emphasis on technology? In my understanding, technology is neutral. A knife can be used for making a sandwich or killing someone depending on the motives of its bearer.
If you turned off today's technology, the dams and power projects, the lights would fail, food would spoil in the refrigerators. You need high tech in order to operate any advanced civilization.
The only way you can create abundance is through technology. This person is asking if you just need to change the values, or why do you put so much emphasis on technology? It's really both that we need. But even if you had the most ethical people if they develop and people who had developed value systems, but you had no resources, you'd end up with the same problems that we have today, the same antagonisms, lying, stealing, cheating. It's the environment that shapes our behavior and shapes our values. So you can't have one without the other. You have to have the technology that supports abundance. That's what the religion is today. They superimpose a value system that doesn't correlate with the environment. They put up signs, "Do not steal," but as long as few people control most of the wealth and the resources, you're going to have stealing and cheating no matter how much they go to church. Maybe not for themselves, but for their children.
And if you did away with high technology and machinery, you go back to slavery. George Washington had 300 slaves. Think about that. The guy would be run out of town today.
So it's only through technology that we can bring about a world of abundance for everyone. Okay, are there any books you could recommend on general advice for changing value systems and understanding the psychology of prejudice?
If you look at our website, we have a list of many books that are available that will give you specific information in specific areas like communication, language, the history of civilization. Look at our website. We have a wide listing.
Yeah, the show of violence talks about how environment shapes behaviors, but it really doesn't, none of those books put it all together and talk about what the value system should be in a different type of system, in a system that produces abundance for everyone. This is where they really fall short. They don't pose an alternative direction and the values that support that. So I would say read Jacques' book, The Best That Money Can't Buy, first, and get some of the lectures. If you can't afford it, we have a lot of things up on the Venus Project YouTube channel. And if the team purchases some of the material and shares it with other teams or other people that help support the project, plus you can learn more about this direction and the types of values that would be most constructive in a resource-based economy.
Remember that even the values are changed as our technology moved on. We have no fixed concept of the ideal city. We are not utopians. We believe that no one can design the ultimate city or the ultimate laptop or computer. They will always undergo change. There are no final frontiers, no best way of doing things. There's the best way we know of up to now.
On your basic lecture CDs, you explain how you taught your kids to count using dots. Could you explain it again? How did you do it? Because the sound quality wasn't good.
Well, in the early days, I can only describe what I did. I would just put 2 dots down and ask my son or my daughter what they see. And they say, 1, 2. I see 2 dots. I said, you don't have to count them. You can see there's 2. And if there's 4 dots, you can say 4 dots. And then I could go up to so many dots by slowly increasing the amount of dots so the child could look at it and at a glance say, there's 20 dots without counting them. And that's the way you do it. In other words, do it gradually. Start with 2 dots, 3 dots, 6 dots. So the child, the 6 dots right away, 10 dots right away without counting them. He can learn to do that if you gradually increase the amount of dots. And some children go up to about 30 dots without counting them. And I'm sure you can exceed that too.
Who would make decisions, and how did they arrive at them?
No one makes decisions in the Venus Project. They are arrived at. In other words, if you don't understand that, if you want to know how long an object can last in a rotational field, like where they make tires, they put the tire against a concrete wheel and it turns for so long a period. That's how they can say that this tire is guaranteed for 3 years or 10 years by testing it. And the Venus Project puts every concept to test. In other words, before we build a dam, we study what are the positive effects of that dam on society and what are the negative effects. You have to have a negative and positive study of any project before you even begin the project, the benefits and the negative aspects.
Okay, Jacques talks about establishing the population through education and voluntary birth control. Could you expand on this concept?
Yes, if you know that so much land, arable land, and has to have so much water to support a population of a given size. So you just don't build a city. You build a city based upon what the area can provide. If transportation for goods and services are too far from the city, you expend a great deal of energy wasted delivering the goods to the city. So the city should be taken into consideration all the surrounding elements, the production centers and everything else. How much energy does it take to bring material to that city? The whole thing has to be evaluated.
And the concepts that you would discuss in terms of reducing population?
Well, that would be the population has to be maintained in accordance with the carrying capacity of the environment.
How do you educate people to that concept?
Just the way people who know the concept are educated, through films, diagrams, charts, and tests.
You had a story once which was good, the dynamic equilibrium, explaining that.
Oh, well, that's
It's harder without a drawing, though.
Yes, it's very difficult.
Okay. We'll leave that one to drawings. How long do you expect an intervening transition period will last, and how will this be managed?
First of all, Fresco and Roxanne have no power. It's the population. If people in large groups demand that the Venus Project or the resource-based economy be installed, it will. It depends on the work you do. And we work constantly, every day of the week, without vacation. So it depends on how much work you do to inform people as to the benefits of a resource-based economy.
Yeah, we don't have any control of the transition either. We think it will be really terrible, especially in the United States, where so many people have had so much and really spoiled and have a lot of guns too. I don't think they'd sit back easily and have them lose their homes and their jobs and education.
And healthcare.
Yeah, and health care. There'll be a point where when they start to revolt, it will be pretty terrible. And there'll be a lot of military dictatorships, more military control, Jacques is saying, throughout the world, as what is happening now. Do you think that there are periods of exponential growth in technology, of technological advancement, and periods of kind of dormant periods? How does that work?
Yes, that has to do with finances and how much money or equipment the lab has. But in the Venus Project, every lab is given whatever they need. No more digging up nickels and dimes for research in heart disease, cancer, or any other physical disorder. Every lab gets whatever it needs and more.
Yeah, there'll be exponential growth in a resource-based economy.
Continuously.
Right, because you don't depend on the economy when the government has funds or private industry can get funds or grants. Do you accept the idea of free will?
Not at all. I believe that every word we use, all our facial expressions, come from movies, books, or parents. Remember this, when you say good morning, there's not a single word that's your own. Every word you use, your mannerism, Happy New Year, have a nice weekend, all those statements are pre-designed. There is no free will, there's no evidence of it. An Indian never looks at a wigwam and says, hey, I think I'd like a wigwam of stainless steel. He can't say that. It's not within his experience. No Eskimo would ever say, I'd like 3D TV equipment, and I'd like a laptop computer. An Eskimo doesn't have that within his frame of reference, so he only reflects that which is available in the environment. When an American Indian thinks of heaven, they call it the happy hunting ground, where there's lots of animals, lots of straight pieces of wood to make bows and arrows with. They can't think outside of that, of what they've been exposed to. I'd like you to think about that, toss that around. People cannot exceed their environment unless they travel. But if you live in Weehawken County all your life, you're a Weehawkenite. Unless you travel all over the world and study different cultures, social anthropology, social science, behavioral science, you have a broader point from which to draw references from. But if you're just brought up in a limited town and you have a grocery store, all that your brain has is groceries and where to order them from. In other words, you cannot exceed your environment unless you travel or expose yourself to many books and literature.
What is a university city?
All the cities in the Venus Project would be university cities. You never graduate. You always are updated as to what's new. All your television sets have no commercials. They update you continuously of what's new, what's available, and what we have to do to make substitute materials for those shortages. In other words, whenever there's a shortage of material, we have a lot of labs working on possible alternatives.
I think Jacques mentioned the possibility of the first city being built in Brazil. Is there something about Brazil that might make this possible?
It's only that Brazil has lots of resources, lots of minerals and mining facilities, an ideal climate for photoelectric generators and wind generators. I would say that it could be done almost anywhere. But we do recommend that we start the cities in tropical regions where we can get more photoelectric cells and more wind turbines on the coastlines. We'd have to do areas of study which have been completed. A great deal of this work is already done. There are many points on the Earth today where there is continuous wind, and that's where we'll put our electric generators, our wind turbines. In other words, if you do the survey and complete the survey as to where it would be most efficient to locate energy generating plants, geothermal, wave power, wind power, temperature differential, underwater rivers and streams that can be harnessed to generate electricity. There are many possible sources of energy. It is not limited. It's almost unlimited. And if you can tap the sun, the infrared energy and the ultraviolet rays, and many radiant energy forms which we haven't even begun to examine.
And also it would be best to have the land flat for the first city, or many of the cities.
Yes, it would require too much energy to level land that is not flat for the design of the first cities.
We wouldn't want to do that either. Can you go into detail about how you worked with changing the members of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan?
Oh, well, that is somewhat complex, but I knew a leader in Miami that had a war surplus store. And he talked to me occasionally about the Klan. And he said, Fresco, you're a smart guy. What do you think of the Ku Klux Klan? I said, it's a great organization, but it doesn't go far enough. If you attack, you lose it. If you say it's a great organization, but it doesn't go far enough, they say, what do you mean? You get their ear. Do you understand what I'm saying? You don't attack any custom or social values. You show them a better system. You try to demonstrate it, a better system of how they will be better off in a new system.
Do you want to go into the, it was interesting how you worked with the Klan, it's a longer story.
Well, I did a lot of animal experiments to show them how animals learn and how people learn, how their behavior is shaped by their culture. Once they understand that, they no longer hate people. If you understand any child in any country was brought up as a baby in Nazi Germany, they'd be a Nazi if they were only exposed to the viewpoints of guys like Adolf Hitler. If you were brought up in France, you'd speak like a Frenchman. You'd have all the facial expressions of a Frenchman. If you're brought up in Sweden, you'd think like a Swede. If you take a Swedish baby and bring him up in Israel, he'll behave like an Israeli. That the environment really shapes behavior. If you're not sure of that, get hold of some elementary books on human behavior.
Can you go over the stories that you did with the picture? You pulled out the picture and showed them. It's a longer story.
No, it's not physically demonstrable.
Okay. I'd like to explain it.
Go ahead.
All right. Jacques did many different methods with the Klan. One of them,
One of the methods I used
I was going to go into Bambi, the
was
story with
projecting
Bambi.
a picture. And this individual told me he can look at a person and tell me all about him. And I said, if you can do that, I'd like to learn how you do that. So I projected a picture, which I got from the post office, and he told me that the man he was looking at was a good man, a Christian, a war veteran, a family man. Then I pulled the bottom of the picture out, which is a statement on wanted by the FBI for subversive action against the United States. Well, members of the Klan began to laugh at him for the first time. See, they never laughed at him. He made all kinds of statements. It was not subject to experiment. Once that happened, I did not attack him. The group itself modified their behavior in relation to his statements. In other words, you have to take the time out to verify your conclusions.
Another example Jacques did was that he had a record that he played, and he asked Lou to tell him everything about the person who was talking. And he had an Oxford accent and spoke very well about science and aeronautics. And Lou would go on and say how much he was a very smart white man with glasses and white hair, went to school, very well educated, and went on and on. And after a while, when Lou really dug himself in the ground, then Jacques pulled out a picture of this person talking, and he was a black man raised in England. And so they all laughed at him. They all laughed at Lou.
In other words, you have to prove to whatever extent you can, with whatever means you have available, to try to turn people around. Do not argue with people. Present evidence for your views.
And then somebody else is asking, what is the immaculate pig?
The immaculate pig is a condition which I set up in which I conditioned a pig to put dirty rags into a wastebasket to clean up the environment. And then the pig would change his dirty bedsheet. The bedsheet was covered over 2 rollers and moved like a tractor. There was a wheel at the end, which the pig learned to get up and turn that wheel. That changed his dirty bedsheet. Then I had the pig walk under a hose bent like the letter U, and there were little wires sticking down from top which scratched the pig's back. He liked his back scratched, so he went up and back about 10 times. And then when he learned to do that, I put a jar of water and soap up so it turned on the shower when he walked underneath it. So the pig took a shower, changed his dirty bedsheet, and picked up all the filth in the environment, put it in the wastebasket. The way I did that is when he deposited the first object in the wastebasket, it had a micro switch underneath it so that dispensed food. And every time the pig put some waste in the basket, the food dispenser would dispense a little food. So I called it the Immaculate Pig.
He put a little white coat over the pig with a red cross, and it said the Immaculate Pig. And he filmed that when he was at a transit camp during the first 29-30 Depression. And then he used that film to show to the Klan, to have them understand conditioning.
And the effects of environment on behavior.
And they were really amazed. They said, Jacques, I raised me a lot of pigs, but I ain't never seen me a pig that smart. How did a pig get that smart?
Yeah, they projected their own values into it. But you have to use demonstration for people that have no such information. You have to inform people just as you are informed. Suppose a person doesn't want to live in the city. Can he live where he wants to live? Yes, he can. Suppose a person doesn't agree with another person. Can he openly disagree? Yes, he can. But just ask a question. What do you do with people that don't want to live in the houses we recommend that they live in? Just pinpoint the question. Like, who makes the decisions? How do they make the decisions? What if two people have a different concept? How do you select the better one? How do you know which is better? What means do you have for dissecting which city will be built if many cities are submitted? In other words, tighten your questions up. Don't go through a long dissertation.
Yeah, I wanted to describe how you got in with the Klan, because first, Jacques always talks about if you're dealing with different people, to really try and identify with them, have them identify with you. So you're not an alien just lecturing to them or something, because they'll reject you.
In a resource-based economy, how would the drought in Africa that's going on be dealt with, the drought in Somalia?
How would the drought be dealt with in Africa?
You're talking about an already damaged area. Once we get the Venus Project underway, if the nations join together, there are floods in different parts of the world. We don't harness the floodwaters. In the future, we will harness the floodwaters and direct them through our canals to water storage basins. There's more than surplus water. There's more water than the world needs. We've had floods all over America. We don't harness that water yet. In the future, we have to learn how to harness resources that are scarce.
You've also talked about, since it is a coastal country, you can bring in the salt water and in canals and do desalination.
By evaporative condensation.
Right.
In other words, you can't start all over the world. You have to start the Venus Project somewhere and gradually arrive at a resource-based economy. We can't start tomorrow morning, as some people assume that we can go right in and clean up everything right away. No. This is something that could have been done in 1927 if people were educated. They weren't. And so we have to go through the transition, which will be painful. Yes, and hurt many people. There'll be many people shooting other people. That we cannot control. The transition will be rough.
Jacques, you talk about a lot about associative memory in your lectures. So is the ability to make associative memories what defines the intelligence of an individual, or are there other attributes?
He's asking, you talk about associative memory. Is that the ability to define intellect in people, or are there other attributes?
By associative memory, let me tell you what I mean by it, so you don't go off in some other direction. If a woman sees a new flower that looks like a rose, but the only difference is it has black spots on it, if she sniffs it and it burns her eyes and nose for a couple of days, the next flower she sees that looks like a rose, or any flower with different dots or patterns on it, she holds it at arm's length instead of sniffs it right near her nose. That's associative memory. We make all our decisions based on associative memory. If everybody had a nose a foot long, people with a small nose would have surgery done. If that's the social norm,
Okay.
Try to conform to the social, that's associative memory.
Do you equate that with intelligence?
No, not at all. An intelligent electrical engineer of 75 years ago couldn't get a job today because his methods would be obsolete. There's no such thing as intelligence because it's an ongoing system. Anybody that's intelligent in any field, an airplane designer of 75 years ago couldn't get a job in a modern aircraft factory because he's too far behind. But then he was called intelligence. What does the word mean? It really doesn't mean anything specifically except that the person appears to have knowledge at a given time. An intelligent person 50 years from now will be very different than an intelligent person today. The word is not useful or descriptive.
Maybe a better word would be closer approximations of reality, how much your associations are linked up with the real world.
Yes, I would say that would be a better definition.
I was thinking it's just because how you separate us from animals is that we can the ability to make more associative memories than animals.
Is that how we're separated from animals, that we can make more associative memory than animals?
Well, yes, we can make far more than animals. Animals have simple associations. That's why you condition them with food. If you give them food and put them through a certain routine of behavior, they can learn things. But when it becomes very complex, you can condition animals to complex systems, but you have to know how. And I don't have the time to go into that now, but if you really bring up an animal in a closed system with a bunch of levers and gears, if the animal presses a lever and water comes forth, he presses another lever and food comes forth, he presses another lever and the air conditioning goes on. The animal can learn to press so many levers, but he wouldn't know how to survive in the natural environment. I hope you understand that.
Yes, thanks.
Hello, I have a question. Jack Fresco was talking about a new language needed in the future so people doesn't have bad interpretations, a human language. So my question is, if that language, let's say, already exists, does Jack Fresco think it's a good idea to start implementing that language after or before the Venus project happened?
It will be installed after the Venus project because all language today is subject to interpretation. You read the Bible and somebody says Jesus meant this, another person, no, he meant that. The third person says you're both wrong, he meant this. So you have the Lutheran, the Catholic, the Seventh-day Adventist, because it's subject to interpretation. But the language used by chemists is not. When a chemist talks to another chemist about a chemical formula, it's precise.
That's excellent. The question is because there is a new language developed. It's called Logsban. I don't know if Jack Fresco, if you know about Logsban, but it's a new language designed so you can talk to machines, and all the characteristics of this language is very, very similar of what you say, Jack Fresco, about the new language. So that was my question. Is Jack Fresco familiar with this language, and if he thinks it's a good idea to implement that to a resource-based economy?
The new language has to be related to the environment. Every word has to have a symbol that is fixed. You have to have a reference to what you're talking about. Instead of saying Happy New Year, do you control the weather? Do you make the New Year happy? All the words we use are a lot of BS because they're just words. If a person goes away for 3 days, you say, have a nice vacation. Why don't you say, have a nice life? Why just have a nice vacation? If you say, have a nice life, you're through with it forever. People talk about a lot of things. Happy birthday. You don't control their birthday. You say, have a nice trip. You don't control the weather. What are you talking about? So people just talk. They have a lot of words, and let me say this, possibly 70% of the words they use have no meaning.
What about the language he's talking about that interfaces with machines?
It can't be designed until you have a resource-based economy. In a monetary system, it won't work.
I have a question as well. Yeah, a few weeks ago I was here and I had asked this, but I'm wondering, in a technology dominance system, how will improvements will work? For example, if a scientist comes up with a new design and no one is in charge of changing things, how will the improvements will occur?
All improvements are submitted to a computer which makes all that information available at every research lab. And if you submit an idea, it goes through the computer and it's matched with known patents and ideas. And it says the idea you submitted may have been invented in 1933, and that it's not new. It'll tell you who did it. And if it is new, it'll be sent to every lab that's concerned with that particular problem.
So the computer system will act like, will do the confirmation.
The computer system will confirm the fact that the idea is needed and new and should be applied.
Okay, thank you.
I was wondering about the pictures of the city design that Andrew rendered the most recent one that we see on the websites. Which part of the world would this fit into?
Well, it's best to do it in the tropical regions or subtropical because of solar power and wave power and maybe wind power. But we'd have to do a survey first to determine the optimal use of whatever energy generating system we have. Now, along the west coast, there's all kinds of volcanic access. In other words, if we can tap fusion volcanic power, we can build generators all along the west coast, all the way up to the Aleutian Islands. It all depends on what's available and what's to be built in a given area.
That's why the survey is so needed first.
Yes.
So it's not just based on opinion, but it's based on what there is out there and what is needed and what the people need and where they are.
All decisions are made on the basis of the survey. All the shortages are determined on the basis of the survey. How many hospitals do we build? How many cases of heart disease are there? How many cases of cancer? How much research is given to each project? Depends on how extensive the damage is or a new disease that may occur. The research labs are all controlled numerically by the nature of the problems.
Okay, I guess we'll wrap it up this week. We really appreciate your questions and that you're interested in listening to the answers, so keep them coming if you'd like.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys and the work that you're doing. And please, there are no questions that I would not want to answer. So don't hesitate. Ask any questions you will.
Thanks to everyone for coming. Thanks, Jeff and Roxanne. We'll see you next week.